The studio lights were harsh, the kind that makes every movement feel exposed. Cameras glided into position, red recording lights blinking awake as a quiet tension settled across the room. On one side of the table sat a man known for dominating legal debates for decades. He had argued before the highest courts, trained generations of attorneys, and carried a reputation that filled rooms before he ever spoke. Across from him sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She didn't shuffle papers. She didn't rehearse expressions. She simply watched and waited, calm and still, as if she already understood how the night would unfold. Moments earlier, the professor had stepped out from backstage gripping a thick stack of notes, his confidence unmistakable. He told producers the audience would soon witness the limits of Crockett's legal understanding. To him, this wasn't a debate. It was a correction. The setup seemed obvious: an 85-year-old legal giant versus a relatively new member of Congress. Experience against momentum. Authority against challenge. Most people believed they already knew the ending. But Crockett recognized something others didn't. As a former public defender, she had faced opponents like this before, people who mistook prestige for preparation and confidence for control. When cameras began rolling, the moderator introduced the topic: voting rights, a subject layered with history, law, and political power. The professor spoke first, thanking the network before launching directly into his argument. He called the proposed legislation dangerous, unconstitutional, and a violation of state authority over elections. Then he added something sharper, suggesting that only someone lacking serious legal training could support such a bill. The message landed clearly. Crockett didn't react with irritation. She had heard worse in courtrooms where real lives were on the line. Instead, she waited. Timing, she knew, often mattered more than speed. When she spoke, her voice was steady and deliberate. She didn't begin with legal theory or personal credentials. She spoke about voters' communities she had represented long before entering Congress. She reminded viewers that the Constitution wasn't written for scholars alone. It was written for the public. Then she cited the law plainly. Article I, Section 4, Congress's authority over federal elections. The 14th and 15th Amendments promises designed to protect access and equality at the ballot box. She explained them not as abstract concepts, but as living guarantees affecting real people when polling locations disappeared or voter rolls quietly changed. The professor interrupted, citing Supreme Court precedent and emphasizing state sovereignty. His tone sharpened as he framed her argument as emotional rather than legal. Crockett waited until he finished. Then she leaned forward slightly and said she understood those rulings not only because she had studied them, but because she had represented voters directly affected by them. The room grew quieter. She asked whether state authority should include the ability to silence eligible voters. She asked whether equal protection had meaning if it existed only in theory. The professor dismissed her examples as convenience rather than constitutional violation. Crockett responded with a question that shifted the conversation. Had he ever represented someone who couldn't vote because they couldn't afford required documents? Had he sat across from voters trapped between rigid office hours and inflexible identification rules? He didn't answer directly. Crockett used the silence carefully. She spoke about the gap between legal theory and lived reality, barriers that rarely appear in textbooks but appear frequently at polling places. Then she did something unexpected. She quoted the professor's own writing from decades earlier, words supporting federal oversight in states where voting access faced threats. She asked calmly whether constitutional principles had changed, or whether his position had. For a moment, he froze. He attempted to recover by arguing that circumstances had evolved. Crockett followed with another simple question: Had the Constitution itself evolved, the tension in the studio deepened. The professor leaned heavily on his credentials, reminding viewers of his career, his courtroom victories, and the students he had trained. The implication was clear: expertise should settle the debate. Crockett acknowledged his experience respectfully. Then she pointed out something uncomfortable. He was relying on reputation instead of addressing her legal arguments. That strategy might succeed in a classroom, she said, but not in public law where consequences affect millions. He accused her of focusing on past statements instead of current law. She explained why those statements mattered. They revealed a pattern, one where interpretations of state power seemed to shift depending on political outcomes. She referenced his more recent argument that state legislatures could override voter decisions when selecting presidential electors, a position that could nullify millions of ballots. She held up the document containing his words. The audience murmured as she asked how that argument aligned with his current warnings about federal overreach. He attempted to narrow the discussion to technical legal distinctions. Crockett calmly connected the dots. Both arguments, she explained, revolved around the same question: who ultimately controls democratic participation? For the first time, he appeared unsettled. The moderator attempted to redirect the conversation, but the energy had already changed. This was no longer theoretical debate. It was a direct examination of consistency. The professor challenged Crockett's experience, insisting emotional stories couldn't replace constitutional structure. She agreed, then methodically outlined the structure itself. She walked through the Constitution step by step, explaining Congress's explicit authority to regulate federal elections and enforce civil rights protections. She cited specific court cases and enforcement clauses without rushing or dramatizing. Each time he tried to interrupt, she paused respectfully and continued. Her calm delivery made the argument feel precise and difficult to challenge. When he accused the bill of federal overreach, she surprised him again. One contested section, she explained, mirrored language he himself had supported in previous congressional testimony. She named the hearing, the date, and the wording. She slid the document across the table. As he read, cameras captured the shift in his expression. Confidence gave way to realization. Turning briefly toward viewers, Crockett explained why these contradictions mattered. Voting rights debates often treated citizens as statistics instead of participants in democracy. When the professor resumed speaking, his voice had slowed. He argued the legal landscape had changed. Crockett asked which rulings justified that shift. He hesitated. She pointed out that even Supreme Court decisions limiting oversight still affirmed Congress's authority to address discrimination using updated evidence, precisely what the legislation attempted to do. The professor tried one final argument, claiming a section of the bill could weaken minority voting strength. Crockett blinked once, then corrected him. That section didn't exist. The silence that followed was complete. He shuffled his notes, realizing he had confused the bill with separate legislation. Crockett clarified the confusion calmly and explained what the actual provision addressed. In that moment, reputation alone stopped being enough. When asked whether he wished to revise his position, he admitted some criticisms relied on outdated or incorrect information. Crockett responded with grace, saying strong debates required accuracy and honest engagement from all sides. When the segment ended, the impact was immediate. Clips flooded social media, not because of shouting, but because of composure and preparation. Commentators described the exchange as a demonstration of discipline rather than aggression. Legal analysts praised her ability to translate constitutional theory into real-world consequences. Even critics of the legislation acknowledged her command of the material. Behind the scenes, producers quickly recognized they had captured something unusual. The professor reviewed his notes quietly, while Crockett remained composed, sipping water and thanking staff politely. Within hours, the exchange spread nationwide. Law students analyzed her questioning technique. Civil rights organizations reported increased volunteer interest. Political commentators described the moment as preparation triumphing over prestige. Days later, the professor released a statement acknowledging her strong command of the issue while maintaining his constitutional concerns. Meanwhile, Crockett received a surge of interview requests and invitations to speak at universities and legal forums. The debate sparked broader conversations about voting rights, constitutional authority, and the evolving nature of political credibility. But the moment's lasting significance went deeper. It reminded viewers that authority in a democracy cannot rely solely on reputation or experience. Ideas must withstand scrutiny on their own merits. Arguments must stand on evidence, clarity, and consistency. Later reflecting on the exchange, Crockett explained it was never about humiliating an opponent. It was about protecting participation, ensuring democracy remains accessible to everyone it claims to serve. That night under studio lights, the country witnessed something rare. Not a victory defined by volume or confrontation, but one shaped by preparation, composure, and the quiet power of being ready. Because in the end, the strongest argument isn't delivered through status or titles. It's delivered through truth, clarity, and the courage to defend both.